Welcome to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast, powered by StatRoute.com. And now, here's your host, Ryan Skullroot.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullroot. I am your host, and we have our weekly Waiver Wire Madness episode tonight. We will be going over the players that I believe are the best suited for you to pick up that are owned in 50% or less of leagues at each position. I have one exception because he's owned in 52% of leagues as far as Yahoo goes. We got some headlines to go over, dealing with some injuries and signings and re-signings. So got a few of those to go over real quick. Real quick, before we get started, I did want to bring this up. For those of you who think you've maybe had a bad week in terms of fantasy, I play in a couple of free Yahoo leagues just for the fun of it, the ones that you can just sign up for free on. And in one of those leagues, in a half-point PPR league, I managed to score less than 50 points. Part of that was because I didn't institute a kicker. And what I've done with these leagues is I've kind of waited, because not a whole lot of people actually pay attention, is I don't grab a kicker until I absolutely have to. So I'll pick up upside guys and play through that, and as long as I know that there are kickers available from either the Sunday night or Monday night football game. If I'm up by enough, I just won't pick up a kicker that week. Well, this week, I didn't even bother to pick up a kicker because I was getting my butt handed to me so bad. I don't even know if this guy has paid attention to his roster in the last few weeks. Yes, he has. This guy actually had changed his lineup a little bit. I was projected for 111 points in half-point PPR. And I had Jared Goff, who scored me 1.1 points on a 19-point projection. Keenan Allen scored me 4.3 on a 15-point projection. Tyler Lockett wasn't terrible. Based off of 12.5 points, he got almost 10.5. Alvin Kamara, 17-point projection, down to 10 points. Eckler was a full 10 points below his projection at 4.3 points. Mark Andrews was the only guy that I had anywhere close to his projection who beat his by 1.5 points. Cooper Kupp missed his projection by 13 points with only 3.7 points. And then my defense, Tennessee, basically decided to give up the ghost and decided not to play defense for the first time this year, and only scored 4 points against the Denver offense. So 48.72 points in half-point PPR with guys that are, top 15 in a lot of, I had a top five tight end who performed well, 2 top 15 running backs, and 3 top 15 wide receivers. I think they might actually have been top 10. Yeah, and that's just how it goes. So I'm hoping for a better week next week. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and get into, let me get back to the headlines. Make sure I've got that page up. Let's go ahead and get right into the headlines. Actually, quick announcement. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate anyone who leaves us ratings and reviews as well. Helps us to know better what to do and what not to do for the website and for the podcast. All right, now with that, let's get into the headlines.
Today's headlines.
All right, with the headlines, we are starting off with Amari Cooper has a thigh contusion. It doesn't seem too serious. However, he is in a lot of pain. They'd hoped he'd play through it yesterday, but felt that he couldn't. The team will evaluate him as being day-to-day. Chris Herndon has officially been activated for the Jets after his suspension. So he is officially now good to go. We will see how he gets acclimated into the offense with Adam Gase. Will Dissly, we mentioned this yesterday. There was a news report. I don't think it was on Sleeper or anything, which is where we get a lot of our news and headlines. But a news story that I saw following the Seahawks, that Will Dissly, it would take barring a miracle, is going to miss the rest of the season. So that's where he is at with his Achilles injury. So at this point, drop Will Dissly and see what else you can find on the waiver wire, or make a trade for in terms of the tight ends, which really sucks because Will Dissly had been one of the most consistent so far of the top end tight ends up to this point. Ben Watson has been re-signed by New England. I think that partially has to do with the fact that Matt LaCosse has continually been injured and hasn't really been able to do much, so they have re-signed Ben Watson. Sammy Watkins, the Chiefs are optimistic that he plays Thursday. Real quick, let me bring up that game. Let's see. Yeah, so it's going to be at Denver, which with how Denver's defense played this last week, again, it was against a very inconsistent Tennessee offense that really has struggled all year and got so bad that they had to bench Marcus Mariota and bring in Ryan Tannehill. So they are hoping that Sammy Watkins will be healthy. They're optimistic that he will play, which, to be completely honest, I think that the Chiefs need Sammy Watkins in this game. They have Tyreek Hill back. They need Sammy Watkins as a solid number 2, and then going back and forth between Hardman, Pringle, and Demarcus Robinson as their number 3, I think will really help out the offense. So another thing for the Patriots, N'Keal Harry has officially started practicing again. They have a couple weeks to kind of evaluate how he is going to do. He is set to come off of IR after week 8, can come in week 9. I believe that the Patriots then have a bye week in week 10. So he can come back week 9. He is definitely a guy that you want to kind of keep an eye on, especially with how many injuries that they have had at the wide receiver position. Losing Antonio Brown, who keeps begging to be re-signed by the Patriots. Josh Gordon has been off and on questionable. Julian Edelman obviously is the only steady thing in terms of wide receivers in that offense, and Philip Dorsett's been dealing with injury. But Philip Dorsett has been struggling with injury a lot of his career. All right. Geronimo Allison actually went out in the game, the Monday Night Football game tonight, with a concussion. So that's something we're going to have to watch on how he can come back to be ready for next week, going up against Oakland at home. I like Allison. I think that Allison and Marquez Valdez-Scantling will be a lot more effective if Devontae Adams is there, someone to take a lot of the pressure off and to be that number 1 wide receiver. So we'll see how Adams does with the turf toe injury and what he can do to come back. So last thing in terms of the the news and headlines, Sterling Shepard, it looks like he is likely going to be out for a little while. Because of that, the Giants have re-signed Benny Fowler to add some depth to the wide receiver core. So at this point, you're looking at Evan Ingram, Saquon Barkley. They're hoping, I believe, everyone's believing that he is going to be back this week to be able to get back in the lineup, and hopefully for those, again, for people like me that drafted him, that he is going to be able to provide a good spark to that offense and hopefully take a little bit of pressure off of Daniel Jones for the rest of the season. So like I said, Sterling Shepard's likely to be out. So in terms of wide receivers, it's going to be still Golden Tate's probably going to lead there. If not, Evan Ingram are going to be the 2 lead guys in terms of receiving there, and along with Saquon Barkley, who I know is going to get a lot of dump offs. So. All right, so that is it for the headlines. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then we will hop right into waiver wire madness. Have your fantasy teams been struggling this year? Or perhaps you've been doing pretty well but want to put yourself over the top? then make sure to visit our friends over at Finish First Fantasy Advisors. They are the premier one-on-one consulting firm that specializes in providing you with expert support to help guide you to the championship. You will be matched with one of their expert advisors to provide you with the season-long insight for your redraft, dynasty, or DFS formats. Their advisors will contact you weekly to answer all of your questions and provide you the needed information to get to the next level. Set up a free 15-minute consultation by emailing them at info@finishfirstfantasy.com or by visiting them at www.finishfirstfantasy.com. That's www.finishfirstfantasy.com.
Waiver Wire Madness.
All right, our waiver wire madness tonight is brought to you by Prolytics.com. If you are looking to go to the next level with your DFS lineups, you need to go to Prolytics.com. Their AI learning machine provides predictive analytics, DFS roster construction, decision optimization, and more. Our staff has already been very happy with the success that we have had using Prolytics for our own DFS lineups. We love their projections and recommend their services to anyone wanting to take that next step with their DFS lineups. Make sure to go to Prolytics.com. That's PRO-LYTICS, pro-lytics.com, and use the coupon code SkullKingFF, all lowercase, SkullKingFF, for 40% off your first month at Prolytics.com. That's Prolytics.com. All right, let's go ahead and move into our waiver wire section of this episode. We are going to start off with the quarterbacks. And like I said, I told you there was going to be one guy that is owned actually in 52% of leagues. And so that is actually the one we are going to start off with first, and that is Mr. Josh Allen. He is owned in 52% of the leagues, but he's coming off of a bye week. So because of that, I'm willing to make a little bit of an exception for him. Coming off of bye, he is going up against the Miami Dolphins at home. The Dolphins have given up the most points to quarterbacks so far this year, and so I'm on the Josh Allen train. I have him in one league. I actually picked him up and held on to him because of my situation at quarterback was so horrible. So I am a big fan of Josh Allen, especially this week, and think that he could be a solid guy, as long as he stays healthy, a solid guy the rest of the season. So moving on, the second guy that we are looking at in terms of the quarterbacks is Mr. Kirk Cousins, going up against Detroit, at Detroit this next week. 47% owned on Yahoo Leagues. Detroit is giving up the 13th most points to quarterbacks as of right now. I don't know if that's been updated from tonight, from tonight's game. But the Detroit defense has been giving up a little bit through the air, and what we saw last week with Kirk Cousins, finally airing it out a little bit, with the run game struggling to really get a whole lot going. Diggs has finally made an impact. Adam Thielen has been pretty solid this year. So if they start to actually work on airing out the ball a little bit, I think that Kirk Cousins could be a solid streaming pick for this next week. Next guy, Jacoby Brissett, owned in 42% of leagues, going up against Houston at home. Houston has given up the 8th most points to the quarterback position so far. Houston's defense, their defensive backfield has struggled a little bit. Yeah, they've had some tough matchups like Tyreek Hill last week. But I still think that that Brissett can put up some solid numbers. Again, he has a decent arm. He's got some good receivers that he's working with, and he also has multiple tight ends to be able to throw to as well. And he can run a little bit. So adding that into the mix, I've pretty much all season so far have liked Brissett as a streamable option, depending on how much he's owned. So I think that this is, again, another solid week that he could be used. And the last guy is Mr. Daniel Jones, especially if Saquon Barkley is back, going up against Arizona, 29% owned. Arizona gives up the 4th most points to the quarterback position in terms of fantasy, and so this is a really good position for Jones, especially if Evan Ingram is healthy and playing. Evan Ingram, Arizona gives up the most fantasy points to tight ends, And so this would just be a huge game for him, a good game for Daniel Jones to kind of get back after having a crappy game against, let's face it, the number one defense in the league. For those, I think going after the Thursday night football game, based on average points per game, the New England defense is number 9 in standard leagues. So just put that in perspective with what that defense is doing so far this year. All right, moving on to the running backs. Only have a few of them that I really like this week. Number 1 is Jamal Williams going up against Oakland this next week at home, 16% owned. A little bit of a tough matchup. The Oakland Raiders give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to the running back, and part of the reason why I like Jamal Williams is because of the fact that they are still splitting carries in Green Bay. This is the same issue that we dealt with last year with Matt LaFleur when he was the offensive coordinator with Tennessee. We've been saying this over and over and over again. When he was the offensive coordinator with Tennessee, we didn't know who was going to get the ball, whether it was going to be Deion Lewis or it was going to be Derrick Henry. Usually, it was a pretty even split between the two of them, and so everyone was hosed in terms of who they were going to use until we got to like the last 4 games of the season, and they finally really started just giving the ball to Derrick Henry. This is going to continue to be the same issue here. The thing about Williams is, pick him up at only 16%. You can use him as a flex if you really need to, and if Aaron Jones gets hurt, he steps right into the main role. So again, this is a guy that I like, especially he played really well. He completely outdid Aaron Jones in tonight's game. So the next one, basically my next 2 picks are a little bit more owned a little bit more, but they are great handcuffs. Alexander Mattison going up against at Detroit this next week. Detroit gives up the 4th most points to the running backs, which is why I was amazed that Aaron Jones didn't have a better night tonight. Again, all that production went to Jamal Williams. Madison, again, if something happens to Dalvin Cook, Madison is going to be the guy to own. He is going to be probably right now the number 1 handcuff, and he'll be a solid number running back 1 if anything happens to Dalvin Cook. And again, he's been getting some okay numbers just in getting the few touches that he has. So. The last running back that I've got on here is Chase Edmonds going up against the New York Giants at the New York Giants, 34% owned. He's a little bit more owned than anyone else. Part of that is because of the fact that David Johnson had some health issues with his back coming out this last game, and so he's going up against the Giants, who have given up the 17th fewest points to the running back, so they're right in that middle ground. But if Johnson's back starts season up and they need to give him a little break, Chase Edmonds again could be flirting with running back 1 type numbers in this offense because of his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, just like David Johnson. His ability to run the ball, he drops his shoulders very well and really gets low and can take on defenders. So I like Chase Edmonds as a handcuff to own. That it could be a desperation flex play, especially in deeper leagues. Could be a guy that could really work out well for you. So, moving on to the wide receivers, Mr. Mecole Hardman going up against Denver. Again, this is not a great matchup. Thursday night football, 48% owned. But if you've got injuries and you're not unsure, Hardman could be a guy that could be worth it for you. Denver gives up the 4th fewest amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. But Hardman, for the most part, he's been okay. He's kind of been back and forth. Had one kind of explosive game. I believe that was the Oakland game where he had a really good game. It kind of has been back and forth the last couple games. He's been okay. I think that with Tyreek Hill there pulling top defenders, and if Sammy Watkins can get healthy, I think that will help Hardman going up against slot corners. Have better matchups, and I think he could produce a little bit more in the offense. So again, he's going to be more of that flex play. Number 2 is Auden Tate going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's 23% owned right now. 12th. Jacksonville gives up the 12th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Auden Tate, I think, could be a really solid play. Again, getting a lot of dump offs from Andy Dalton. if Jalen Ramsey plays and goes up against Tyler Boyd. Now, I know that Tyler Boyd kind of, for the most part, sticks in the slot, but I think that, again, with how their defense plays, I think Tate pulls secondary coverage, and so therefore he could be, the better play and could get a little more work himself. I want to say in the last 2 games he's had, around 14 to 15 targets in the last couple games. So definitely a guy who's getting work with both John Ross and AJ Green out. Next one is Jamison Crowder, 42% owned. He is going up against New England, who has given up the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. The thing about Crowder is he has become the security blanket for Sam Darnold. And with Sam Darnold back this week, I want to say he had another 9 targets, 6 catches for around 100 or like 90 to 100 yards. And Jamison Crowder, if you remember, in the week 1, 17 targets, 14 catches. So I think that he has really earned the trust of Sam Darnold, and if he's really getting chased down by that vicious New England defense, I think that Crowder could provide, again, that security blanket and little outlet for Darnold to be able to get the ball out. Crowder could get another 10, 15 targets. Now, he may only come up with 5 or 6 catches, depending on how well New England is getting to him, but Crowder is a guy that probably needs to be owned at this point. He's already, especially since he's already passed his bye week. Next one is Cole Beasley. Again, not a great option, but he has been very solid in half-point PPR. He already has 3 games of 10 points or more. He's just finishing up his bye week. Again, 15% owned, and he's going up against Miami at home. Miami has given up the 9th most amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. This is a solid flex play in PPR and half-point PPR for you guys to be able to use, whether you're dealing with injuries or bye weeks or whatever it is. Cole Beasley is being used as a security blanket out of the slot for Josh Allen, and being used pretty well. So I think that Beasley is a solid pickup, again, as a flex in PPR and half-point PPR. If you're playing standard, I don't like Cole Beasley for that because he's getting a lot of those kind of crossing patterns. It's due to the scoring situation. He's not a guy that I would go for. Finally, and one more, N'Keal Harry, owned at 6% again. He's on IR until week 9. If you have an IR spot, maybe you have Saquon coming off IR, and you can pick him up to throw him in there. Great, maybe do that. So, because while it's a little unknown on how he is going to be used in the New England offense, with the amount of injuries that they've been dealing with, he could come in and possibly have a decent role from the get-go in week 9. They may, again, though, wait until week 12 or wait until week 11 after their bye. All right, now moving on to the tight end waiver wires. Number 1 is probably Noah Fant going up against KC. Again, this is a Thursday night game. It's never fun picking up. I mean, you've got all the X's here. Picking up a rookie tight end, playing on a Thursday night football game. However, he is playing at home against a Kansas City team that gives up the 9th most amount of fantasy points to the tight end position. And so he is a guy that, again, if you remember how Flacco is always, for the most part, when he was in Baltimore, used the tight end as a security blanket and really, gotten the ball to tight ends well. That could be the case here in this game. The Kansas City Chiefs have not been able to apply a whole lot of pressure to quarterbacks, so Flacco may have the time, again, to work a lot more to Cortland Sutton. That could very well be the case. Number 2 is Dawson Knox, again, going up against Miami. He's been vultured and kind of had a couple of down weeks the last couple of weeks for the Buffalo Bills. However, again, going up against Miami, 8% owned, very widely owned, and Miami gives up the 6th most amount of fantasy points to tight ends. You'll notice that a lot of these guys are very, very low owned. The reason I'm having to do this is, for the most part, we keep our waiver wire pickups to about 50% owned in leagues. And so because of that, you get to the tight end position, and because it's really top heavy, you go through the tight end, you're looking at ownership percentages, and it gets to the very bottom, and it shows, or you get to about 50%. Next thing you know, it's like 52%, and then 24%. So Noah Fant's like the next guy under 50% at 24% owned. And so really that's why we're having to deal with this. Dawson Knox at 8%. And the last one, Luke Wilson versus Baltimore. Again, this is at home in Seattle on Sunday, going up against the Baltimore defense, who has given up the 14th fewest points in terms of fantasy to the tight end position. However, Luke Wilson is only owned in 1% of leagues. You're not going to have, if you have a fab system, you're not going to have to bid much for him. He is basically the next best next best tight end in Seattle. He's not going to put up the numbers that Will Dissly did. They just don't use him that way. He is a much better blocker and used in that blocking for the blocking scheme, but he will get some catches. He may, get a touchdown or two. It's possible he's more of a DFS value play than he is a plug and play in terms of redraft leagues. But I think that he is a possible usable player for this week. All right, moving on to the defense and special teams. Really, there's the only one really that I see right here that really is a big pickup at 50% owned is Tennessee. If you've got them going up against the LA Chargers at home, Chargers have been horrible. They have not played well the last few games. And so this is a game that I think that the Tennessee defense could bounce back a little bit. Right now, the LA Chargers, in terms of giving up points to the defense position, are 14th. They have given up the 14th most. And so they've given up turnovers, not scoring points, and that sort of thing. So they are definitely a team to look at in terms of a possible start. There really isn't anyone else. Detroit against Michigan. Detroit's been playing some pretty solid defense, so they're a possibility. The only other quote unquote favorable matchups are the New York Giants and Arizona going up against each other. And I don't really like either one of those defenses. So really, the only one I really like in terms of defense, if you need a streamer, is going to be maybe Detroit. Otherwise, I'm looking at Tennessee. Because none of these, we're getting into bye weeks and a lot more teams are off, so you can't deal with that. Pittsburgh has been really, really solid this year. However, they are on a bye week in Week 7 and come back. If you want to pick them up ahead of time, they play Miami in Week 8. So that's maybe something to consider for this waiver wire period. So, all right, that is it for the Waiver Wire Madness show for tonight. Looking forward to another great week. I hope you guys are ready for the next couple nights. We will be doing game previews, going over more of the injury news and notes to kind of see where guys are at. Again, we thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrud, and we will talk to you later.
Hey, SkullKing Nation, thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.